As we near the end of 2021, ask yourself, have you been naughty or nice? As children, many of us were warned that if we didn't behave throughout the year, we'd find a lump of coal in our stockings on Christmas morning instead of gifts from Santa. But most of us probably weren't told that if we misbehaved, we'd be visited by a half-goat, half-demon monster with black fur, sharp fangs, and a long tongue. Krampus, the demonic Christmas monster, is a centuries-old legend from the Alpine region of Europe. Legend goes that on Christmas Eve, Krampus and St. Nicholas visit the homes of young children. If the children have been well behaved, then Santa will reward them with delightful gifts. And if they haven't, Krampus steps in to administer brutal and terrifying punishments to the naughty children. While this is the more modern version of the Krampus story, the origins of this creature go back much farther. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the history of the Krampus, from his potentially pagan origins to his contemporary status as a Hollywood star. But before we delve into the lore of this Yuletide boogeyman, we're going to take a brief moment to talk about the origins of his jolly counterpart, Santa Claus. Because you can't really tell the story of Krampus without also telling the story of St. Nicholas. Nicholas was born in the 3rd century AD in what was then Greece but is now modern Turkey. While it is hard to distinguish fact from fiction when talking about St. Nicholas, the most commonly accepted narrative is that he was born into a wealthy family, but lost both of his parents at an early age. Raised as a devout Christian in a time when Christians were violently persecuted, Nicholas used his inheritance to help the poor and the needy. He became a bishop as a young man and was even imprisoned for his Christian beliefs. Throughout his life, Nicholas was renowned for his dedication to the poor, with some legends claiming that he would leave silver coins in the shoes of the needy. Nicholas died on December 6, 343 AD, and over the years, this day would become a cause for celebration in the Christian church. In fact, up until the last few centuries, December 6 was the day that Christians celebrated the festival of St. Nicholas, not December 25th. Throughout the Middle Ages and beyond, December 5th would be known as St. Nicholas Eve. On this night, it was said that Nicholas would visit households and bestow gifts of silver coins in the shoes of the poor, just as he had done when he was still alive. As the festival of St. Nicholas became more popular in Europe, St. Nicholas acquired an entourage of helpers. The companions of St. Nicholas, as these creatures are commonly called, were generally dark and demonic entities with pre-Christian, pagan origins. They would arrive in households with St. Nicholas on the night of December 5th. If the children of the household had behaved that year, St. Nick would reward them with coins, candy, and other small gifts. If they were bad, they'd be punished, often brutally, by one of his companions. The companions of St. Nicholas vary by country and region. In the Netherlands, Zwarte Piet, or Black Peter, was St. Nicholas's nefarious henchman. Along the River Rhine in Germany, Belschnickel was a terrifying companion of St. Nick. And in Austria, Germany, and other Alpine countries, Krampus became the most popular companion of St. Nicholas. In modern times, St. Nicholas and Krampus work together as two sides of the same coin. But the character of Krampus is much more than Santa's naughty counterpart. His history goes back centuries and possibly millennia. While we know where Krampus originated, it's hard to know when Krampus originated. Krampus first appears on the record in the 17th century, but his history may be longer, with some accounts placing his origins in pre-Christian times. Horned deities are common amongst ancient religions around the world. Given the enduring and universal existence of horned pagan deities, some sources claim that Krampus's legend has pre-Christian pagan roots, though it is hard to verify whether or not this is true. Another common origin story circulating on the internet claims that Krampus was traditionally considered to be the son of Hel, the Norse god of the underworld, though this seems to be a modern romanticized story with little historical basis. Whether or not Krampus has ancient pagan roots, we do know that for more than 1,000 years, cultures throughout Europe held processions around the time of the winter solstice. Many pagan traditions considered winter, the darkest time of the year, a season that was ruled by the dead and the demons of the underworld. As part of these pagan winter processions, men would dress up in horrifying costumes and run through villages to dispel the evil spirits of winter. They dressed in wooden masks and animal furs to frighten the winter demons away. In Austria, one such procession was known as the Perchtenlauf, or Perchtenrun, named for Perchta, a goddess of Alpine paganism whose mythology would eventually mix and mingle with Christianity. Perchta, also known as Berchta or Percht, depending on the region, embodied the duality of good and evil by appearing in one of two forms, either as a beautiful lady clothed in white or as a haggard, ugly old woman. In Bavarian and Austrian folklore, Perchta would visit houses to enforce cultural taboos during the 12 days between Christmas and the Epiphany, otherwise known as the 12 Days of Christmas. Initially, she was most well known for enforcing the prohibition of spinning on holidays. Perchta was also said to visit the households of young children on Twelfth Night, and this is where the legend gets really dark. If the child was well behaved, they would receive a coin in their shoe, a tradition that should sound familiar by now. And if they were naughty, they were disemboweled, filled with stones, and stitched back up again. So much for a lump of coal. Perchta had hordes of spirit companions called Perchten, who could also be light or dark, though folk traditions generally depicted them as dark and demonic. During the Perchtenlauf, Austrians would dress up as these demonic Perchten and proceed down the streets of their villages at wintertime, sometimes stopping at houses for schnapps. Unsurprisingly, the Catholic Church was not fond of this pagan procession and tried their best to snuff it out. By the 6th century AD, Christianity, and specifically Roman Catholicism, began to spread throughout the Alpine region. By the 11th century, the festival of St. Nicholas became popular in this area of the world. The Church allowed the Perchtenlauf to continue, trying their best to merge this tradition with the festival of St. Nicholas. And they were successful to a degree, as some Austrians would dress up as St. Nicholas during the annual Perchten runs. But in the 17th century, the Church, already under stress from the secularized reforms of Emperor Joseph II, banned the winter solstice processions, including the Perchtenlauf, deeming them immoral and anti-Christian. And this is where Krampus, as we now know him, fully came into being. As pushback against the Perchtenlauf bans, the Austrian people introduced Krampus, the horned, hooved, black-furred, fanged monster with the uncomfortably long tongue. The name Krampus may have come from Krampen, the old Germanic word for claw. Originally, Krampus referred to a race of monsters, and not just the singular character that we now know. Once again, the Church was forced to compromise and decided to work Krampus into their St. Nicholas tradition, pairing the two figures together as a duo. Given Krampus's horned appearance, the Church also added chains to Krampus to symbolize the binding of the devil. Krampus would visit households on December 5th, the eve of St. Nicholas, which came to be known as Krampusnacht, or Krampus Night. Carrying a bundle of birch rods and a basket on his back, Krampus would creep into children's bedrooms. If the child had been naughty, Krampus would beat him with birch rods. And if the child was especially bad, Krampus may even eat him or throw him in his basket and carry him down to the underworld. As the Krampus tradition grew throughout the 17th century and beyond, families would leave golden-painted birch rods around their homes to remind children to behave, lest Krampus take them down to the underworld. In other words, these golden birch rods were the original elf on the shelf. For a few hundred years, the Krampus tradition thrived in Austria, Germany, and parts of Italy and France. But in the 19th century, Krampus took a strange turn, one that would help lead to his eventual banishment. In the late 1800s, postcards became a popular method of communication thanks to innovations in the global postal system. Penny postage stamps, which were introduced in 1840, made mail delivery easy and affordable. Letters, which were once charged by distance, were now charged by weight, which allowed people to send letters for a very small fee. As letter mailing became more common, people found creative ways to send their mail, including art cards, which were sort of like early postcard prototypes. And while there is a debate around which country invented the postcard, in 1869, Austria became the first country to officially issue postcards through their national postal service. It wasn't long before this Austrian innovation collided with another. Krampus postcards became a popular item in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Strangely, these postcards depicted Krampus in lewd and distasteful situations, often licking children with his long tongue or posing with women in suggestive positions. Despite their tasteless nature, these postcards were popular and reintroduced Krampus as an adult character as opposed to the more child-oriented image that he had come to possess. Between these crass representations of Krampus and the character's long-standing associations with the Christian devil, the figure of Krampus and all events tied to him were outlawed in Austria in the 1930s, under the fascist Dollfuss regime and the Christian Social Party. In the 1950s, government campaigns depicted Krampus as an evil man and discouraged Austrians and everyone from participating in festivals and traditions tied to him. For the first half of the 20th century, Krampus began to fade into legend, being pushed out of popular thought and left to the realms of ancient myth. But in the late 20th century, Krampus began to experience a bit of a renaissance in Germany, Austria, and other European countries. Why this happened isn't exactly clear. Perhaps Krampus regained popularity as part of a larger trend of reclaiming and re-embracing cultural heritage in post-Eastern Bloc Europe. Perhaps it was a pushback against the increasing commercialization of Christmas. Whatever the reason, today, the tradition of Krampus is alive and well in Austria, Germany, and even North America. In modern times, the tradition of Krampus is celebrated with the Krampuslauf, or Krampus Run. Like the Perchtenlauf of old, the Krampuslauf features men and women dressed in hideous and horrifying representations of the Krampus. During the Krampuslauf, masked cavorters terrorize onlookers, drink schnapps and other adult beverages, and altogether cause a ruckus. While most common in Western Europe, Krampus runs have become more popular in the United States, with Krampus runs having occurred in Philadelphia, Portland, Oregon, New Orleans, and other large American cities. American media have also embraced Santa's dark counterpart, with Hollywood movies, video games, and even Krampus-themed haunted houses popping up over the last 10 years. In many ways, Krampus's resurgence may be a reflection of our times. In recent years, there has been cultural pushback against the commercialization of Christmas. In the same time frame, dark, gritty, and raw subject matter has become increasingly popular in all forms of media. This trend is reflected in the popularity of true crime TV shows and podcasts, in the prevalence of graphically violent horror films, and even in the rise of cynical depression memes. Western culture seems to be plunging headlong into our collective shadow, and it makes sense that our media and artistic expressions would reflect this. Like the Europeans of the Middle Ages, we are once again obsessed with the duality of light and dark, of good and evil. And who better to lead us into the dark recesses of our psyche than the demonic Christmas boogeyman, Krampus? A Merry Christmas to all who celebrate it. And if you've been naughty this year, beware the Krampus.